Our next speaker is Matthew Stith, and is Paul here? Perfect. Matthew Stith and Paul Vixie, who will be having a fireside chat on reputational providers and what makes them effective. Matthew is an industry liaison at Spamhaus and has traveled from within the United States to join us. How very security guy. This is Matt's first time presenting? That can't be right. Third time presenting at NANOG. And it's a pleasure to have him speaking with us today. Paul first took to the NANOG stage in 1994. Since then, he's spoken 26 times. I'm sorry, I don't have a cross stitch for you. Once as a keynote in 2019, and most recently at NANOG 86 in Hollywood. Welcome.
Are we on? Yeah. Thank you for the introduction. So we're up here today to more or less talk about how threat intelligence providers and hosting companies, networks, et cetera, can collaborate together to be able to solve challenges that are happening in abuse. So, I don't know how much you are aware of when we really started our collaboration. It was kind of out of a necessity that we were seeing a giant amount of abuse that was happening on the AWS infrastructure. But from what you've heard internally, how did that reaction go, and what caused the team to be like, hey, we should probably reach out to providers and see how we can mitigate this type of abuse that's happening on our network?
So from the stories that have been told about the 2020 event, which you guys blogged about because it was largely a result of your advice that we started blocking outbound TCP port 25. So thank you for that. I was not there at the time, but I'll say we most likely started in some kind of denial, like, gee, managing this particular risk is going to cost a lot of mind share, possibly dollars. It won't make us any money, why should we? And I'm not saying Amazon, it likely did that. I'm saying that any company that you approach and say, gee, you've got this spam problem, you should really solve it, starts out kind of in denial phase, hoping it'll go away. But there are plenty of well-educated, long-experienced people inside of AWS and in Amazon more broadly. And so the message that everybody eventually got as a result of blocking port 25 is that doing the right thing saves money, saves more money than it costs. And it also protects your reputation, which is in a way a risk. So it turns out to be a win-win. You'd much rather invest upfront in obtaining the right answer than to have to pay along the way for having sort of, rejected any answer. So that turned out to be a huge brick of credibility for Spamhaus within AWS.
Yeah, and how we were viewing it is, it just seemed that these were low-hanging fruit things. And most of the time, when you have a wide, huge abuse problem happening on your network, it's typically something that just has been missed. And what we in our security industry do a lot of is we state something like blocking port 25. And it happens at a certain level or for the certain segment of the industry. They all do it, they all declare victory, and then we don't really talk about it as widely as we could. So there wasn't this intrinsic knowledge within AWS that, maybe we should do this. And once we brought it to them, and yes, there was a little bit of hand-wringing about, should we implement this? Should we not implement this? And as we were seeing what they were more or less contributing to about 50% of one of our zones that does automated listings based off of heuristics, and the traffic that was coming out there was indicative of unauthenticated email, just spewing out over port 25. And that's where we got to the point of saying, okay, we can do this. And, the great part about it is they were able to segment it out and be able to communicate it out effectively to their customers. They wrote blogs about it, and there were FAQs available to the customers. And also, the legitimate customers that were actually needed to have port 25, there was an option, there was a route for them to go. So that was, something that it was a win for Amazon, and it was a win for us, because our goal is to work with any legitimate company to help you mitigate some of your abuse on your network.
Well, what this pattern reminds me of is 28 years ago, when Dave Rand and I started a company called MAPS, who was the first anti-spam company, and we started delivering distributed reputation. We invented the RBL and failed to patent it, so oh well. But the big problem then was open relays, because every SendMail that had been installed on any system, and for that matter, a lot of Exchange servers installed in Windows, comes out of the box willing to relay email for anybody. And it doesn't say that I'm only willing to relay from inside to outside, or from outside to inside. So outside to outside was just, that's how it was. And so huge percentage of the early years of us trying to save the world in the way that Spamhaus is now doing, us MAPS back in the day, was people saying, I don't want to do any work to keep you from getting hurt. That, you'd make the phone call, or they'd make a phone call because they got listed in the distributed reputation system in the RBL. And we would have to engage them in a conversation of, I know it's not something you did on purpose. I know it's something you'd rather not have to learn about, but it must be done, and it must be done by you because your infrastructure is being used to harm others. So that's the fundamental template of trying to get people to pay attention to their contribution to the spam problem. And it always starts with that education, negotiation, counseling, consulting process. And it could take weeks, it could take months. It used to sometimes involve lawyers, but that's who humans are. I don't mean to be doing the harm that you're saying that I'm doing. So why do I have to take action now? Well, I guess you could blame your vendor for shipping you an email server that had this terribly insecure default. But if you want somebody to blame them. But you have the action must now be taken by you. So that's we're just repeating old patterns.
Yeah, and that's why why we're up here today is to talk about this collaboration piece, talk about working together, because we're going to see things that are happening on Amazon's network that they're not necessarily seeing because it's coming into honeypots, spam traps, or whatnot, and when you talk about like the sending community, they're very focused on some of the feedback loops and demarc reports and all of this stuff that they can receive. And guess what doesn't send demarc reports? Spam traps. And a lot of the entire internet doesn't send any of this type of feedback back to people. So there is the opportunity for us to be able to reach out and talk through these things, but we need to, as an entire industry, even the network operators, we need to all understand that we should be talking about some of the challenges that we're having together and talk about them freely and talk about them openly. I understand that there's probably a lawyer somewhere that's like, no, but you need to be able to talk about this stuff openly so you can talk about how we found it, how we fix it, how we're going to make sure that it happens again, and how we can continue to evolve ourselves. And yes, Paul.
Without eternal repetition of the message, we're going to see eternal repetition of the behavior. There was a time when everybody had finally gotten through the first wave of all of this, and everyone then working in the industry knew what they had to do, and they knew what to check on, and they knew how to not let this waste any of their time. But those people aged out, and the infrastructure that the next wave came into was not as spammy as it became. And so every generation wants to learn its own lessons. Most children, for example, don't understand how they could have been born because clearly their generation invented sex.
No, absolutely. And, it's something that, when you think about how we're expecting networks and people and companies to be able to evolve and understand, what was happening in the past to be able to apply some things in the future. So like even threat intelligence providers, we've had to evolve because it used to be just you're either on a list or you're not on a list. And, there was more or less just to say, this is a bad source, do what you want with it. There's this whole connotation right now that we're saying, block list. It's not necessarily the best thing to call these things because it's more of a negative reputation. There's something wrong going on here. But what we want is we want anybody who's getting connected to, once they check something, it ends up and they're like, okay, has returned and says in some one of our zones, we want them to be able to make the decision on what they do with it. And, that's how we've had to evolve, and we've had to provide additional context and more ways of being able to deliver this information to people, because it's not just email. We started out, yes, just email, just focused on email, but now we're talking about putting things around botnet controls, around malware, around phishing websites, et cetera. So, that's something that we've had to do to be able to provide the best thing that we possibly can to people that consume our data or need some assistance, so we can come back to them and give them, some understanding of why, and not just say, it's listed, terminate the customer. We don't want to be in that world. We want to be in the world where we're able to say, they're doing ABC, and then they need to do X, Y, Z to solve the problem. And Paul, how would you view the evolution of threat intelligence solutions, or just threat intelligence in general?
I'm sad that they came so late, but the internet was born and then grew so quickly that it's immensely powerful, and it is the best accountability laundering machine that humanity has ever devised. And under those conditions, we can expect that everything which can be abused will be abused. Or as I prefer to say, nothing which can be abused won't be, just to drive the point home. And, so threat intelligence developed later. The idea that somebody would be on the network that wasn't in Whois, that you couldn't just call, would have been crazy talk in 1994. But here we are in a world where it's necessary to have a vibrant, growing industry of threat intelligence providers who often compete, but they also often cooperate because everybody wants the same outcome. And so, we seem to be getting better at this. People are willing to accept that they need either a person or a budget or a vendor, somebody who is going to help them do this. And, the lesson that I mentioned earlier will have to be repeated. People are gonna learn it, or they're gonna hear it over and over again, which is your reputation is precious. It's hard to get it back once you have done something that lost it. And you will ultimately save more money than you spend if you pay attention to what your equipment and your network is emitting. And it's part of the operating costs, and it's a necessary, inevitable part of the operating cost. And anybody who thinks otherwise is going to get abused until they learn the lesson.
Yeah, and to ask you another question, in terms of, so you founded AWS security, or not founded, but like your role in AWS security. How have you seen Amazon been able to change the way that they approach certain challenges? You can be as specific or as vague as you want to, but how have you seen that evolution come? And I imagine that you've had to constantly re-educate, reiterate, over and over again, because that's also a gigantic organization. But what would you say has been some of the best outcomes that you've experienced?
So it's true, I am part of the AWS security team, which, although its name suggests it's part of AWS, is actually part of Amazon security. So AWS is kind of my customer, whereas Amazon is my boss. And everybody up and down the company is proud of what AWS has accomplished and wants to do their part to make it even better after they've been there a few years. And they're very protective. Now we obviously, as a global cloud service provider, we get attacked a lot. And a lot of those attacks are against our customers. In other words, the person to whom the pain is aimed might be just some customer of ours, and they angered someone, and so now there's a DDoS. But it could also be an attack that is designed to capture customer resources, like a computing instance or a API key or whatever, so that the real victims, who might not be might not be customers of ours, can be attacked more effectively using our powers, simply by bouncing an attack through us, or maybe even injecting some code and then generating it from us. So there's two kinds of attacks. So there's those against us and those that are just trying to abuse us. Turns out, by the way, coin mining, nothing looks like coin mining on a power graph except coin mining. So we're not allowed, we do not know what our customers are doing. We can't see their data, either at rest or in motion and so forth. But we can tell when coin mining is occurring without looking at the data. That's kind of cool. But that's a perfect example. People generally don't sign up for AWS and say, yeah, I want to mine coins, and they've got a lot of power, so I'm going to do that there. It's in our contract that you can't do coin mining. We don't want our power used in that way. But if an attacker can get in, they don't necessarily care what the owner, or the customer signed, and whether what they intend to do is allowed. So, if we see coin mining, it is overwhelmingly going to be because somebody had a guessable password or some other method of getting in. So we have to protect both, because we don't want our customers to have to maybe pay a big bill because they got popped and then abused to abuse others. And we also don't want them to be impacted by these attacks. And securing the AWS infrastructure and customer workloads is my job. And I'm part of I think large but small by Amazon standards organization that all thinks that way and all feels the same. I do want to say the agreement that we announced between Spamhaus and Amazon is actually between Spamhaus and a part of AWS, which is Trust and Safety. It is not the AWS security, although we in Trust and Safety work arm in arm. But I'm very proud that we got that done. And it just indicates that both of us think that not only our best interests, but the other person's best interests will be advanced if we can just cooperate.
Yeah, and what I appreciate about it is, whenever you're dealing with a large organization, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, or whatever, it is very, very difficult to keep certain relationships going, because you may be working with one person 1 week, and couple weeks later, they've moved to another part of the business, or they've moved to another company. And what we wanted to be able to do is, we've been able to formalize something between our two organizations, is being able to, make something sustainable. And that, we're not going to just have everybody that we were talking to on a phone call not understand what was being talked about. There is more knowledge sharing that's going on between groups within Amazon about, what is a spam house. And, we want that to be sustainable, and that is very important to, our efforts to be able to collaborate together. And, we understand that, the scale that we're at is we're not going to be able to formalize an agreement with everybody. But the important thing to understand is that we do want to, if you're running into challenges on your network and Spamhaus is causing you all sorts of headaches, we do want to be able to talk to you about it. We want to be able to, provide you some advice, provide you, things that you can do to be able to mitigate the problems. And that's what I really appreciate about how we work together, is that it's sustainable and it's ongoing, and it's not something that's just going to fall into a black hole. I've had it happen way too many times.
I think it makes us fellow travelers in that way. And one of the competitive advantages of this kind of cooperation is that if we make it more difficult for bad people to misuse our infrastructure, they will search elsewhere. I mean, they will never stop trying to get in, but to the extent that we can react quickly enough and discover and remediate any systemic vulnerability that allows this type of abuse, then it means that our costs will ultimately go down because we invested up front. And the other thing that's great about cooperation, as between us, is that we see different things. And to get access to your experts who have access to your data is going to help us react more quickly when we discover or when somebody else reports that our infrastructure is being abused. So again, it's a win-win. Don't know why we didn't think of this 10, 20 years ago.
I can't tell you why, but and another thing that I was thinking about around that is, just being able to build that trust between organizations. It takes time. It's just like reputation, and there were many times in the beginning when we were talking through things. Once the port 25 blocking happened, there was a massive drop, but there was still some things that were happening. We were like, are you sure that you blocked it everywhere? And it seemed that there was tunneling that was happening that they just weren't aware of. It was completely outside. They were like, we blocked port 25, it's all good. And we're like, yeah, but this looks like an authenticated email. And us being able to share data back and forth to say, okay, here's what we're seeing, and be able to provide them as much detail as we possibly can. Of course, as a threat intel provider, there's some things that you have to keep behind the curtain, but you want to be able to open up as much as possible, because you want to at least know that the emperor's actually wearing clothes. And to be able to go through that back and forth builds that trust to say, okay, I'm going to come and I'm going to challenge the data that you provided to us. And that's fine. We want to be challenged. We want to be, held accountable for the things that we're putting into our zones. As anybody who's run any types of lists like this, yes, there are challenges in keeping everything accurate and keeping everything timely, and false positives can and will do happen. But being able to have that communication back and forth lets you make yourself a little bit more resilient, builds the trust between the organizations, and overall makes the relationship stronger. And when we are doing things with Amazon, we're like, okay, we've made an adjustment to something. We see it across the board. It's not just happening at Amazon, it's happening everywhere. And when we're able to change things a little bit based off of the feedback that we've gotten, it helps us protect everybody else a little bit better. And that's an excellent piece that we've been able to accomplish together.
We have, and again, proud to call Spamhaus a fellow traveler in this regard. Spammers are lazy by default. They won't do more work than they have to, but they're incredibly innovative. If you take away some of their toys, then they will just not sleep until they have found a new way to do what they desire to do. Dave Rand and I used to joke that spam was a drug, and a spammer would do anything, including a lot of illegal things, to get their next hit. And so we have to, I mean, it's not just, the cooperation is not just between us. There are several anti-spam associations where people can ask questions and get answers. But in this case, the idea of limiting churn, or at least limiting the impact of churn, turns out to be of primary importance because, contracts don't create trust. I know that lawyers think they do or that they can, and they're certainly written in order to enable trust to exist, but trust has to evolve, and it will evolve between humans. And so every time you lose a key person, you're going to slow down the rate at which the other party is willing to share information until their replacement has been around long enough to have earned some individual trust. And so to set this thing up where our trust and safety team knows your investigations team means that there's never a key person. There's always a chance to do what you need to do with the trust that you have while you're bringing some new person up to speed after you've just hired them. And that, we tried to do that without having this contract, and it was a best effort. And I got to tell you, I've never met Jeff Bezos, but I have heard a lot of his words quoted to me. One of them is that good intentions don't work, mechanisms do. And so now that we've moved from the realm of good intentions about team working with team into a defined relationship that is part of everybody's workflow and it's documented, and I expect great things. And I'm already seeing great things, but I'm expecting more great things.
No, absolutely. And, what we want the audience to understand is, yes, there's an agreement with us and Amazon, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody, needs to come into an agreement. But, that sometimes there is the best effort, and sometimes that's good enough, because, you have a certain problem that you need a certain solution for, and, that is going to put as much cost on the adversary as possible. As Paul was mentioning earlier, we want to have people feel like, I don't really want to go to AWS because it's going to cost me 300% more than if I go to miscellaneous other hosting provider. And we want, the adversary to be more risky in what they do. Because once you start adding more risk into what they're doing, you're able to help engage law enforcement in things. And we know that they work like we work in minutes, they work in days. And we want to be able to provide them as much as possible so they are able to get their job done easier. And when we're able to point towards very risky infrastructure, bulletproof hosts, et cetera, that we can point to that and say, okay, you can go after that. And that's what this type of collaboration does is, puts more risk onto the adversary. So they're going to have to take matters into their own hands and not use Amazon, use miscellaneous bulletproof hoster, and they're going to end up being disrupted and potentially, hopefully, put behind bars.
To jump on one point you made, this is conflict. It's unarmed conflict, but it's still conflict. And it's going to be generational. We're going to call this the 200 Years' War someday. And in a conflict between people who simply could never negotiate with each other, for example, spammers versus victims, the game is always to drive the other party's costs up and to drive your own costs down. The more we cooperate, the more we drive up the costs. I like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, basically, that's our message here is, collaborate. I'm not saying you have to collaborate with Spamhaus, but collaborate with somebody out there. Share data back and forth. Make sure that, if you're seeing something, see something, say something. We say it on subways. We say it on airports. Why can't we do it on the internet as well? And very importantly, share your stories. There's been many times that I know that organizations behind these, closed, very trusted groups, they talk about, they had a compromise and the bunch of customer data was leaked, and we're like, so where's the press release about it, about, how you mitigated the problem and et cetera? And they're like, we can't say anything about it because of the type of company we are. And, as embarrassing as it is to have a compromise on your network and you leak customer data out, holding on to that information until either you're legally mandated to say something about it, or if somebody else finds out about it, or if it gets leaked, that's even more damaging. Sometimes just say the embarrassing thing. And I know that, again, there are lawyers somewhere watching or in the room, they're going to say no to this. But, we need to change that mindset of, share your story, because we're never going to know, like, what a problem was until somebody has shared the story, because compromises are happening everywhere. They're happening on Amazon's network, DigitalOcean's, et cetera. And, being able to discover these and be able to share out that information makes us all stronger, because we can all learn from each other.
Yeah, and if we wanted to move slightly beyond the idea that cooperation among victims drives up the cost for attackers, because that's important, but I think we've now said it 6 times. So if we want to move beyond that topic, I want to say that operationally, it's a little bit difficult to get started with cooperation because there is no security team anywhere who wants you to forward your spam to them. They have enough of their own. They do not need your evidence. They already know everything they can learn, and they trust their own honeypots more than they're going to trust some individual submission. So to the extent that you are receiving spam, and I don't mean as an individual, I mean in your ISP, in your school, whatever, it would be wonderful if there was some obvious way to get from I am a victim and I can measure my losses to I am fighting back by cooperating as follows. How would you advise people to break that logjam?
It depends. So, as it's very complicated to think about from the individual standpoint. There are multiple ways for people to be able to report abuse, and the challenge that we have there is, how would I report abuse to Amazon? Now, if I just look at Amazon as a whole, am I going to the store? Am I going to AWS? Am I going to SES, et cetera? There is, some intrinsic challenges there, but it's more, report things that you're aware of to sources that you trust already. So what we ask people to provide us samples. So we're able to analyze and be able to find patterns and things. But when it comes to just the individual user, I don't really have a full solution. I think that this is a point where we need to talk about these large companies that have multiple divisions and whatnot. I'm not going to know where an abuse report needs to go all the time. Sometimes I'm just going to see, Amazon or Google or Microsoft, and do I need to go to, in Microsoft cases, Office 365? Do I need to go to Azure? Do I need to go to Hotmail? And there needs to be a little bit of work done on that side of things for us to be, as users, to be able to submit data to a source in a large company like that, and they can then disseminate it out. And that would be my preferred way of, being able to report abuse when you're talking about these large things. And the companies need to let their users know this is how you can report to us. And now how you communicate that message, that can be something that you can do when you're onboarding them. That can be something if people are getting regular digests from you, you can report that out and say this is how you report a problem to Amazon, and getting that education factor again, saying the same thing over and over again, to be able to get that understanding out there.
Yeah, and I have certainly been through the process of trying to get some large company to pay attention to the spam I just received from one of their servers or one of their customers. And for a while, not in the last decade, but before that, it was popular to say, yeah, we don't accept those by email, you have to open a ticket, or here is a web form, and then you look at the web form and it's like, oh, I got to give my email and my phone number and my home address and all this other stuff before you will even trust that I am sending you legitimate spam. We're going to have to get ahead of that. That may be the next big thing for MOG and the rest of the anti-spam world to focus on, is how can we create effective clearinghouses who know who to trust and are findable by people who know how to submit, thus can earn trust when submitting things to network owners, so that we can get the total delay time down like into the seconds, or at least into the minutes, rather than, as you were saying, the hours or the days, which is where it is now. But what I'll note is that if there were an effective clearinghouse that was easy to find, easy to use, knew who to trust, and had earned trust and knew what to do with spam samples that were sent, that clearinghouse would never not be DDoSed, because that would be kryptonite for the spammers.
Yeah.
So let's build it.
Okay, let's do it. Who else wants to do it? No? Nobody? There we go. Got one, got two? Okay. Yeah, so, Paul and I can keep going back and forth, but, we've got about 9 minutes left. I would love to hear, any insights from the audience, any questions. You can ask, you can complain too. But yeah, does anybody have questions and want to ask anything of Paul and myself?
That's a first. Hi, my name is Eric Miller. I'm with GigStream. We are an MDU apartment Wi-Fi, so we get lots of people with bad devices on our network. Everything from the hacked Fire Sticks that was in a couple of sessions ago to, I'm guessing, the residential proxy networks. We complain and have the whack-a-mole with our IPs getting on random lists, and what's frustrating from our side is the amount of time that it takes us to go from users reporting they can't get to a service to us eventually not being able to figure out why and just having to move them to a different IP block. Obviously, that's not solving the spam problem, but it's getting my customers back online and allows me to focus on my other deliverables. So from our side, yeah, a clearinghouse would be helpful. I have no problem citing people for abuse violations and kicking their devices off the network, and we have the ability to do that. But it's challenging from our side that we just don't know where to go to find why a large player like AWS or a Netflix or Disney Plus is keeping us from reaching their networks. So I guess from the smaller side operators, what advice do you guys have for that?
So we had to argue for 7 or 8 years with Comcast before they would turn off port 25 on outbound. You're going to have to do that, and you're going to have to do a number of other things like that. And then we're going to meet back here, or wherever NANOG then is, in order to figure out what to do about QUIC, QUIC, which is a transport protocol. It's coming down the pike of the IETF. Doesn't really have port numbers. It's always port 443. And so how we're going to block outbound email from unauthorized agents in that era, let's get together in a few years and talk that over. But for right now, you're just going to have to become pretty draconian. And I know, I think it was at a NANOG conference, university told the story about if something started beaconing malware inside the dorms, then its MAC address was blocked. And they didn't notify anybody. They just, oh, sorry, you cannot get anything done until you bring your laptop in and get it re-imaged. and then we will unblock your MAC address. Now, Apple now has privacy addresses for Mac, where we're constantly innovating ways to reinvent yesterday's problems. But you're going to have to do things along this line so that your customers are able to get their real work done, because you will not be in his black hole list.
Right. Well, our problem is we don't know by what threat intelligence services blocked us, because my customers just get a request timed out when they try to stream a Disney Plus video or a Hulu or shop at Target. And then when we try to call those organizations, there's not a way for us to reach that layer -1 human that can help us understand. And I started a firebrand on the Nanog list a couple weeks ago, where I said sometimes the only way for us to get movement on it is to get our legal team to send a message to their legal team. And that's the worst thing that we can do when we're trying to build trust with each other.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a problem with transparency there.
Yeah.
And, when you connect to Netflix, instead of saying, time out, it should say, whatever you want to say, but it needs to more or less say, this is suspected of being a residential proxy. Now, I know that there's other challenges that go with that, because you're going to be like, okay, well, is it the TV? Is it that light? Is it that light? Is it the projector? Because in the world that we're in now, we're trying to give everything an IP address that doesn't necessarily need an IP address. That's another discussion for another time. So it's really, finding that point of transparency, and what I would, suggest to you is, some of the things that Paul was talking about, and, locking down as much as you can. And I know that you probably either know about it, planning to do it, or have done some of it. And, it's asking for that transparency when, you see these types of things happening over and over and over again. And, these streaming services and all of these things have the ability to tell you.
Right.
But they're just not.
We're not Comcast. We don't have the built-in trust of having that @.com.
Yeah. So, in my suggestion there to ask for transparency is get a coalition of the willing. It doesn't necessarily, you don't need to go at it alone. You can bring Comcast in and say, hey, what does this mean to you?
Let's get to the next question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. Darren Carr, Quad 9, but not wearing my Quad 9 hat. Paul, I've followed you for a lot of years in my early days of internet engineering. A lot of your insights we were able to take and use from, the real-time blacklists and so forth. I've always appreciated that, through internet engineering, DNS, root server ops, your willingness to give and contribute back to the community. So hearing you right now working for Amazon, and you're continuing with the same ethos, I was a little concerned when you went to Amazon and how that may or may not affect you. I know that affiliation can change some of the things you're allowed to say. Have you had any internal conflict, or did they know what they were getting when they hired you?
So first, let me say that it was never a blacklist, and it was never a block list. I know that the marketing departments of the world has taken over. It was the black hole list. So let's use the right words here. As to me, I was also a little bit surprised that I wanted to work at Amazon. After left my fifth startup, I sort of missed the game. I missed being in it. I needed customers to protect. I needed a tribe to be in over and above my family. And they interviewed me, and I also kind of interviewed them. And they turned out to be my kind of people. They do not want to cost shift. They don't want other people to be forced to pay part of the costs of our doing business. It's a very aggressive company, and we innovate a lot all day for customers. We're constantly trying to do better and be better. But what we won't do is say, yeah, we don't care about the side effects, right? One of the leadership principles is that with scale comes broad responsibility. And that's just part of the ethos of the company, and I was able to tell during my interview process, and I have been living happily with that ethos for the 3.5 years I've been here.
Well, I'd like to thank you as one of the pioneers and people that I've looked up to and continue to try to give back to the internet. It's good to see and refreshing that even for such a large company, you still want to collaborate and share your insights. So thank you.
Yeah, hi, we have a remote question from Mahesh Parmar. He asks, should companies allow port 25 traffic outbound from their network via firewalls? If yes, how can they make it secure other than enabling security features on the firewall? And then a request for clarification. Also, we saw port 25 also needs port 443 to work for emails to AWS Cloud. Why would we need that for email traffic outbound?
Not going to answer the 443 part of that question, but I will say it is necessary to block some services at the port number level because the original architecture of this network was for a trusted enclave. It was the military, it was the universities, it was DARPA, it was completely trusted. You didn't have to worry. We didn't invent firewalls until later when we started getting sort of general university computer labs and ISPs selling dial-up to people. That is when firewalls were quickly invented. So it will be necessary to block port 25 on pretty much all networks, so that people are forced to use 587 or 993 or things that require authentication at the far end. And that means if you want to send email, you're going to have to know who is my outbound mail relay inside this particular network. That's just, don't shoot the messenger, man. That is the situation. And we do the same thing, at least in all of the networks I have ever operated, I do the same thing with DNS. I don't like letting apps do DNS. I don't want a resolver that is built into a web browser to get DNS content that I think will be bad for it. We've been filtering DNS since at least 2016 when ISC released the response policy zone feature. And we require in those networks that everybody use a local DNS server, and the firewall says that only that server is allowed to speak DNS to the outside world. Again, this is our situation. I can apologize, although it's not exactly my fault, but get to work. This is what we got to do.
We have one last question from Matt Pitak. He asks, great discussion. Thank you both. You've been saying that the goal of collaborating as companies is to raise the cost for spammers. How do you ensure that you don't cross the line into colluding to create barriers to entry for legitimate companies trying to get started?
Have a policy, have it defined, stick to it, and don't let your policy be influenced by, don't let your policy be dictated by external sources. Like you can have influence based off of data that you've received, but have that policy. That's my answer to that.
I would add, be minimal. Don't take more action, don't have more policy or enforce more policy than is required to get the job done. The reason the internet was able to birth the web is that the internet is permissionless innovation. Right? It would have been almost impossible to create the web on top of the old telco system, because in that system you had to have the telco's permission before you could connect some new kind of device to the telco's network. And the internet has brought us permissionless innovation. Let's preserve it by only putting in rules and enforcing rules that are absolutely necessary.
All right, thanks, gentlemen.